While Creature Commandos technically marked the beginning of James Gunn's DCU and Superman announced to the world the dawn of a new DC universe, Peacemaker was really the experiment that gave Gunn the confidence and direction with which he wanted to take his new cinematic universe. He managed to do so while exploring the transition from the DCEU to the DCU, examining a character who embodied the perception many people had of the DCEU and how there was more inside that makes him heroic. He just has to choose to turn the page. The biggest criticism of the DCEU was that its heroes didn't really act like heroes. There was a lot of violence and darkness, and even when they were acting heroically, it was tied to violence. It was very of its time. Peacemaker embodies this criticism, and his arc throughout the first season coincides with the universe he's in. The DCEU was a rampant, violent, unheroic universe, and Peacemaker, who is that, is bridging the gap, a journey from being a violent, misguided guy to being an earnest hero. Just as Gunn's Superman was an embodiment of the cultural struggle with embracing Superman, Peacemaker is an embodiment of the DC brand and the kind of heroes it once propped up. The show asks whether those heroes are still heroes in this new era of DC, and if there's a place for them amidst a changing of the cinematic tides. And it's with Peacemaker Season 2 where that arc really comes full circle. If you chart a course from the Suicide Squad through Peacemaker Season 2, you get a nice conclusion to what began there. Bad people forced into conscription to atone for their villainy, viewed less as people and more as disposable bodies to carry out the plans of the government without question. The Suicide Squad tackles imperialism and sees the squad become aware of what it is the government is forcing them to do as they disobey orders in order to do the right thing. Just because they were bad people doesn't mean that their lives should be forfeit. And if they wind up dying in the process, at least they'll be dying for what they believe in versus what they were directed to do. Peacemaker is the only one to come out of that film who followed orders directly, even though he knew deep down it was morally wrong. He deluded himself into thinking his violent actions were necessary and justified because it was in the name of freedom and keeping peace.
I cherish peace with all my heart. I don't care how many men, women, and children I need to kill to get it.
It's through the Peacemaker series that we realize the reason why Chris is the way he is, the abuse he endured by his father that shaped him into a violent individual in desperate need of an outlet. Season 1 was about him coming to terms with his life's mission. Being Peacemaker provides him with an outlet to be an angry person, being violent, but once he reconciles with that, he finds heroism within himself. There's something deeper as to why he does what he does. Trauma that's been there from his childhood that led to the accidental death of his brother that's haunted him his entire life. It's that inability to address that trauma that causes him to conflate his violent actions with being a hero. He's trying to atone for his mistakes, but by ignoring the root problem, his anger and violent nature, he's just doing the same thing he's always done, just under the guise of something different. Christopher Smith is a man starved of affection and love, especially from his father, who is desperate for it. Someone who drowns himself in sex, drugs, and alcohol to numb the pain without recognizing that the pain is actually what allows him to have a greater sense of empathy for his friends and the people closest to him. He just has to listen to it. If Season 1 is about Peacemaker recognizing the source of his trauma and opting to be a better person, a hero, then Season 2 is about him learning that he doesn't need external validation to be a hero, that his past mistakes don't define him, but rather have shaped him in a positive way, that it's better to embrace who he is instead of trying to be someone else, literally, someone who has the life he always wanted and the relationships he always wanted, but at the expense of what he truly believes deep down. It's therefore fitting that the place he finds all of that validation and love is on Earth X, aka Nazi World. Chris gets everything he ever wanted, a father who loved him, his brother, a relationship with Harcourt, and the chance to be a hero everyone admires and looks up to, a perfect utopia to soothe his lack of self-love. But it all blinds him to the very obvious fascist regime that exists all around him. He obviously benefits from it because of his whiteness and status as a superhero, but everyone else, the audience, the rest of the 11th Street kids, can see how objectively off-kilter and uncanny the whole place is. It's an Indiana-ass suburb manufactured for and by white people, with all of the marginalized people and political opponents put in prison. Gunn is clearly critiquing how we've abstracted the objectively abnormal, suggesting that due to our own insecurities, we've normalized objectively wrong things. If people can't recognize the inhumanity when it's as glaringly obvious as a world where the Nazis won World War II, how can we expect to recognize it in our own world, where it's equally as evil, but perhaps slightly less straightforward? Slightly. After all, we're only a few steps away from becoming Earth X. Earth X is what we become when we allow ourselves to believe in the promises of bad actors without keeping their ulterior motives in check. This mentality is best represented in Augie 2. Augie 2 opposes the system, but is equally as complicit in perpetuating its existence. Kinda like Chris, who might recognize the problems he's dealing with, but he's still complicit in perpetuating the same issues that continue to happen, because he's not listening to what he truly believes deep down. Augie 2 might not approve of the Nazi regime, but he doesn't do enough to oppose it, only having the energy to combat the more traditional threats that come with being a superhero. He's sort of just resigned to accepting the world as is and doing what he can in his little corner to make it a better place. If real change is to be enacted, you need people like Augie, like these heroes, to stand up for what's right and take action, to oppose objectively awful people, to disobey orders, commands, and listen to their conscience. Augie 2 failed to do this, refusing to endorse Nazism, yet not doing enough to combat it. And it's perhaps why his anti-fascist parenting probably never took roots in the heart of his kids. Peacemaker 2 was not only an asshole, but a self-destructive narcissist who succumbed to the attitudes of the people he surrounded himself with, becoming a product of the world he was raised in versus a product of the parents who raised him. It's the exact opposite of Peacemaker 1, who endured trauma and was initially shaped by his upbringing only to be exposed to other people, a more empathetic environment that allowed him to come to terms with who he was. Running parallel to Chris is Rick Flag Sr., where Chris comes to recognize his subservience to figures and institutions that exploit his insecurities, fanning the flames of his worst tendencies. Rick Flag Sr. has yet to have that recognition. He creates Salvation in the season finale, a prison to house metahumans against their will, alluding to the fact that Argus is and will be abducting people off the streets, throwing them into an interdimensional prison without due process, stuff that we're sadly seeing in the headlines today, and it's all fueled by personal prejudices. It's telling that the first prisoner of Salvation is Peacemaker, who's not a metahuman, but rather someone Flag has a personal hatred for because of the fact that he killed his son. Instead of blaming the institutions at play and recognizing that while, yes, Peacemaker is responsible for the death of his son and that Rick Flag Jr. died a hero standing up for what was right in opposition to Waller and the mission she assigned him, it's the system that pit those two men against one another. Peacemaker, who isn't necessarily the brightest guy in the first place and at that point hadn't addressed his trauma, wasn't ready to come to terms with the nature of his work and his violent tendencies. His actions since Corto Maltese have demonstrated that he's more than the guy who killed Rick Flag's son, someone whose past transgressions do not define him. And if we look at this situation between Peacemaker and Rick Flag Sr., it's not too similar to the situation between Peacemaker and Rick Flag Jr., only this time, Peacemaker's more of the Rick Flag Jr. character, and Rick Flag Sr. is more of the Peacemaker character. Flag succumbs to his emotional instability, continuing to delude himself. He's justified his actions, particularly in the finale, with the wanton disregard for his agents in the name of security and making America a safer place. But it's really just because he can't cope with the fact that his son fell victim to the very institution he served. Something the other former Argus agents are struggling with throughout the course of this season. This is also very on the pulse because it's exactly the thing that fuels the Stephen Millers, Pete Hegseths, and Donald Trumps in office right now. This entire administration commits authoritarian acts of inhumanity due to personal biases, whether it's distracting from the Epstein files or because they're racist or whatever. They've rejected their empathy for people and instead have decided to be vindictive. It makes them feel good. They have their inner circle, their boys club, and we see this with Flag as he starts to get stoked on what's happening and the bad actors he's surrounded himself with that enable his behavior. What Flag and Argus are doing with the death of their own agents is exactly like what Harcourt and Economos did during the death of Team 1 at the start of the Suicide Squad. Taking bets, celebrating, just not really giving a shit about what's actually happening, and the loss of life, the very graphic, gruesome, and meaningless loss of life. When you exist within a bubble of inhumanity, your worldview becomes shaped by it. Regardless of the metahumans Flag has served with and his acceptance of Superman, the physical assault of Peacemaker paired with enablers like Lex Luthor and his yes men have led him down the path he's on. Flag doesn't realize that he's being manipulated by Luthor, a pawn in his game who has now created the very thing Luthor wanted in a prison for metahumans, the very thing Flag opposed. Luthor manipulated Flag through understanding his hatred of Peacemaker and his instability. He wanted revenge, and Luthor provided him with a means to get it, but at a cost, though he's unaware of it yet, or I guess just doesn't care anymore. Similar to Peacemaker not registering that he was doing bad shit because of his dad, thinking he was in control, Flag is doing bad shit because of Luthor without realizing he's lost control. Chris's journey is one of thinking that the thing he wants the most in the world is to be a hero, to be worthy of the Peacemaker moniker. But in reality, it's him realizing that he doesn't need to be validated by others in order to have value. What he really needs is the love and acceptance of his friends, people who are willing to challenge him when he's wrong and bring out his best traits. This season was about Chris finding and receiving what he needs most in his life, and then using that compassion and empathy to build an agency that reflects it. He doesn't have to go it alone as a hero, nor does he need to be deemed worthy by groups like Argus or the Justice Gang. He has a team of friends who are right beside him, and they're all best when they work together. He doesn't need to be Peacemaker, he just needs to be Chris. Chris is convinced that he's the angel of death because whenever he gets involved with something, whenever he goes somewhere and he thinks he's on the right track, something bad happens. Someone dies or just the situation blows up in his face. But the truth is, death only follows him when he's not listening to himself, when he's listening to his dad, Waller, Rick Flag, whoever. That's really the key with the entirety of the 11th Street Kids this season. They're held back by not embracing their feelings for one another and the inner voice that tells them the truth. Adebayo has to come to terms with the fact that while she may love her wife, their relationship simply is not meant to be when she considers the things she wants out of life, being a spy or involved in private security and helping rid the world of the wrongs brought about by people like her mom. Economos has been a realist who has simply accepted the way things are and resigned himself to not caring and just doing his work for the agency. While he voices his frustrations definitely more so than anyone else, he still submits to the work against his better judgment. He has a defeatist attitude about the whole thing. Throughout the season, he comes to accept the fact that he does care about the fact that the nature of his work is fucked, and instead of rolling over and doing it, he refuses. His entire persona is a bit like Rocket's, rough exterior with a carefree attitude, but secretly cares a lot more than he lets on. Harcourt, who is one of the standouts this season, Jennifer Holland gives incredible performances. I mean, obviously John Cena is the standout of the season. Like, the dude is putting in some of the best acting work I think I've ever seen from him ever, but Jennifer Holland matches him on such a deeply intimate and emotional level. That character is brilliant because she has to accept the fact that her work does not define who she is. It's not the entirety of her life that she perhaps thought it was. While she may have valuable skills, they can be put to use somewhere other than Argus or the State Department. She has a choice. She also has to accept the fact that she does have feelings for Chris, the guy she thought she hated, that Chris isn't as black and white as it seemed, and that, maybe Rick Flag Jr. isn't the guy she thought he was. She has to accept that someone does love her, and she is worthy of that love. That, like everyone this season, her past doesn't define her, and sometimes all it takes is someone like Chris to remind her of her own self-worth, just as Chris also needs that reminder. It's a bit like the Lois and Clark dynamic from Superman, but I kind of love that this is a recurring thing that Gunn is interested in. The idea of people putting their guard down and accepting the fact that they love things that perhaps they were too ashamed to admit that they loved, or had previous reservations about because they're too damaged, or they're just too edgy and this person is too pure or whatever. Like, it's a really sweet thing that I think Gunn is very, very good at incorporating into his works. Harcourt spends the entire season wanting her job back, her life back, because it's what she's dedicated her life to, similar to Chris with the Peacemaker moniker, only to eventually realize that the institution she pledged herself to doesn't actually give a shit about her, and she's been doing awful things for the people in charge. This general awakening that she experiences in the season finale about actually breaking away from these corrupt institutions to do genuine good instead of standing idly by because it benefits you is the general gist of the entire season. Listening to your heart and what you know is right. Instead of being pawns for the government or whoever, the 11th Street kids learn to listen, embrace who they are deep down, breaking free of the constraints that have dictated their lives up until this point. This is why the establishment of the Checkmate agency makes a lot of sense. Even if I wish they had incorporated the setup of this a bit more, it feels like you gotta read a little bit too much into this thing, and the idea of the agency does kind of come out of nowhere in the end, but to, Gunn's credit, it is something that Adebayo had been wanting to do the entire season, so I guess there were little seeds planted throughout, but it didn't necessarily come together in a way where it was like, yes, we're building towards them creating their own agency, or at least the name of Checkmate. I mean, it would have been cool to just actually make the idea of them deciding not to be pawns and instead keeping these kings in check, like making that a bit more literal in the context of the series instead of a bit more implied, I think would have helped make the idea of Checkmate make a lot more sense. But on its surface, it is poetic that these former pawns stop playing the game and then create their own agency to keep the Arguses and other bad actors of the world in check. They're taking something bad, their past actions, their trauma, the blood money Vigilante stashed away in his basement, and turning it into something good. Checkmate. These are former soldiers who have all done bad things that don't benefit the people they're supposedly there to serve, and they decide to detach themselves from the agency and create their own private entity. They take justice into their own hands, not as vigilantes, but like Superman, concerned and empathetic citizens who were once victims of the system they served and are tired of a corrupt bureaucracy treating their constituents with inhumanity. Peacemaker and the 11th Street kids recognize this and break free of the system, starting their own private security spy agency in Checkmate. While they've all, especially Peacemaker, done a lot of bad shit, it doesn't mean they're beyond redemption. If they truly want to be heroes, it's going to take a lot of work, and the best place to start is to look at yourself, take things into your own hands, be true and authentic in who you are. This is very much in line with Gunn's musings on found family, the idea that while you may not get to pick your immediate family, you can pick your friends, and your friends in turn can become your family. Peacemaker was only able to break free of the trauma that held him back with the help of his friends, and now he, along with the 11th Street kids, has found a way to give that back to the people who need help. Checkmate exists as a friend to those in need. And this is why Peacemaker roots the DCU in James Gunn's view of heroism and heroes. Take Superman, for instance. Superman isn't anything like Peacemaker, but his movie is still about him figuring out why he's a hero and why he does what he does. Superman has everything and has to lose everything and figure it out. This isn't too dissimilar from Peacemaker. He's got a mission handed to him by his parents, similar to Superman, only with Peacemaker, it provides him with an outlet to be an angry, violent person, but once he reconciles with that, he finds heroism within himself. And similar to Superman, there's a reason why Peacemaker interprets the mission handed to him by his parents in a positive way. There's a deeper morality within him as to why he does what he does. Just like Superman saw the good in his birth parents' message, even though when he gets the full message, it's not so great. Peacemaker continues Gunn's exploration of broken people who reaffirm their commitment to heroism, learning to channel their flaws into strengths for good. The idea that hurt people don't need to hurt people. Now, I know I've waxed poetic about this season so far, and look, I love it. I think it is definitely up there as one of the best things James Gunn has ever done, because he's less interested in the super heroics of it all and more interested in the characters and their emotional journeys. And nowhere does that feel like it's been accomplished and realized to its fullest than perhaps in Peacemaker Season 2, where he was given the real estate to explore these characters and the deep psychological issues they must overcome, the emotional insecurities, and just the found family of it all. Because we're allowed to spend this much time with them, we grow really attached to them, and I think that's one of the series' biggest strengths. And I know a lot of people have kind of taken issue with the way the season has ended. I don't know, it made a lot of sense to me. Like, I have my issues we'll get into in a bit, but the way everything came together not only made sense, but it was super satisfying. It was a great emotional payoff to the journeys the characters have gone on this season. And like I said, if you chart that course from the Suicide Squad to Peacemaker Season 2, it does feel like a full circle moment for these characters. This feels like this really compelling arc of people breaking free of their directives and learning to think with their hearts. That these criminals or violent agents or desk workers have more within them and can do more to make a difference. I'd actually be curious what the overlap is for the people who liked Guardians of the Galaxy 1, who didn't really dig Guardians of the Galaxy 2, and the people who liked Peacemaker Season 1, who didn't really like Peacemaker Season 2, and then vice versa, because I'm one of the people who loved Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and that while yes, it did overindulge in the Gunn-isms, it was a more intimate, character-focused, and compelling story that put the emotional core of that narrative at the forefront, and was less concerned with the structure and some of the other things in there. And I think you can say the same for Peacemaker Season 2. It puts the characters and the emotional core of their journey at the forefront, and then it was really less concerned with how it got there. The structure of it makes sense, but perhaps isn't as neat as the first season, or in the case of Guardians, perhaps the structure of Guardians Volume 2 isn't as neat as the first film. And that's fair. I think Gunn definitely didn't have restraints on with Peacemaker Season 2, and there were some things that I don't think necessarily worked out for the best because of it. Like, the biggest weakness of the season, in my opinion, was the tangent with Red Saint Wild and Eagly becoming the Prime Eagle. It just felt completely unnecessary and was a waste of time that could have been dedicated to fleshing out Rick Flag's heel turn, which, while on paper makes sense and I can actually buy into it in the context of the series, did feel like it happened a little too quickly. Like, the character almost becomes someone unrecognizable. I mean, if you look at it within the context of him being surrounded by people that are enabling his worst impulses, yeah, I guess you can buy into it a bit, but I'm not getting enough of this character and the stuff that is leading him to that point for that turn to be fully satisfying. Then there's also Flurry, who I think is an interesting character, but the idea of him feeling distraught about losing so many men for a cause he thought he believed in, yeah, I would have liked a little bit more of that outside of the finale, and then also the few episodes in the middle where we got Eagly killing his soldiers and everything. Like, it's clear that this is bothering him and that the way the agency is treating his fellow agents is bothering him. But again, there's really not enough in there outside of the finale to make that arc feel satisfying. And then there's Bordeaux, who is a metahuman and thinks that she's doing things for security and to make the world a better place. And she thinks Flag wants these things, and she kind of admires the fact that he's willing to go to such great lengths to see this happen because she thinks that his moral compass is in the right place. But then when he starts getting surrounded by the Luthor people and then he creates this prison for metahumans, I think it causes her to reflect a bit on what she thought she knew about Flag and what she thought she knew about the work they were doing. And she recognizes that, hey, maybe me doing this work is me being a bit complicit in the downfall of my own people, right? Like, and then she sees what Flag is becoming, and that causes her to switch sides. That all is great, and I can clearly see where Gunn was going with that character, but again, it just feels like she is never afforded the real estate to have that realization. It just kind of all is left to that final episode, which is why that final episode feels like it's blowing through so many things that needed proper development and need to be threaded more throughout the course of the season, other than just like, one or two scenes. And then I think my biggest issue is Adebayo. She's really just a comfort character for Chris and the other white characters in the show. While she gets some great moments, specifically with Judo Master in the finale, where the conflict between her and her partner gets a payoff, she's really left on the back burner for so much of this show. She's just like a therapy character for everyone else, and that just didn't really work well for me, especially considering who she was in the first season. And I wanted to feel more of the conflict with her being someone who knows what she wants, but is struggling with whether it's possible to have that and give up her relationship. If the whole series is about give and take, that we can't have it all and there's always a wrong to your right, the temporary pain we must endure that makes us better people in the long run, so long as we remain true to ourselves, then her arc specifically is really let down by that, save for the finale, which again, you can't save everything for that last episode. I need to feel more of it throughout in order for that last episode to feel like a punctuation point. And if the whole idea is that she wants to help people, and so throughout the season she's going around trying to help people with their problems without addressing her own, I just don't think that Gunn really made that as clear as it needed to be. I think Adebayo is more than just a caretaker, and we needed to see more dimensions to her outside of a select few scenes. Ultimately, Peacemaker Season 2 completes the transition from the DCEU to the DCU, not through cosmic events or reality warping crises, but through characters, through their growth. Christopher Smith's journey from violent man-child to genuine hero mirrors the DC brand's own evolution. The show takes the criticism of the DCEU, that these heroes don't act like heroes, and makes it the entire arc. By the end, these former pawns have become their own agency. They've rejected the institutions that use them, the systems that pit them against each other, the bad actors who manipulate from the shadows. They've chosen each other. They've chosen empathy, chosen to be true to themselves. This is Gunn's DCU. Not gods among men, but broken people choosing to be better. Not continuity for continuity's sake, but stories that matter. Not violence as a solution to problems, but connection and choice and taking action with the best interests of people in mind. While Superman was the loud arrival of the DCU, Peacemaker walked so something like Superman could fly, showing us that real heroism isn't about having superpowers, it's about what you can do with the power that you have within yourself. It's about listening to yourself, choosing your family, and doing the right thing, even when everything you ever wanted is on the line. The experiments work, the bridge is built, and with Peacemaker Season 2, I think we can officially say, welcome to the DCU.